Thank you. Thank you all for staying. So I'm Dharmesh. Let's see, make sure this goes here. And I work at Hubspot. That's all I'm going to tell you about Hubspot because I have a habit of not selling on stage. And a quick word of warning. This is my son Sohan, who's 2.5 years old. He just started preschool about 2 weeks ago. And preschool's been awesome. It's been great, except for the fact he caught a cold there. He doesn't normally get sick. He proceeded to give it to my wife, who then gave it, despite my best efforts, including like sleeping in the guest bedroom. It actually got to me late Wednesday night. So if I go into a coughing spit, that's why. I promise not to die on stage. It'll be okay. So who here's from Boston, the Boston area generally? All right, awesome. So for you folks, go Sox. Awesome. Yeah. And who is not from the Boston area? It's, you can confess, a few of you. And for the, go Sox, because you're in Boston now. I'm sorry. So on with the show. Before we talk about the future of marketing, I'd like to take a quick kind of stroll through memory lane on the history of marketing in the industry overall. And we're going to skip through some of the early prehistoric years. And we'll talk about first the printing press comes out very, very early, the first kind of early form of mass media, which then leads to the newspaper, which then leads to the newspaper ad. The first one was for stolen horses, so I'm led to believe. Sometime later, radio comes out, and we figure out how to make money on radio with ads. Radio then surpasses, ad revenue surpasses that of magazines by 1938. Television comes out, first television ad, 1941. One thing you will notice, though, the time between the technology being introduced to the time that we use it for advertising starts to compress over time. Back then, we had about 12 TV stations. By 1954, TV ad revenue surpasses that of radio and magazines. Not all that surprising. The internet comes along, and we have a company called DoubleClick that introduces kind of the early banner ads and ad-serving technology. Then we have Google, which organizes the internet, helps us find stuff. Leads to Google AdWords. Awesome, awesome idea, although it wasn't theirs. They're the ones that commercialized it, did a really good job with it. Then comes Facebook, which now I think there's like more users on Facebook than there are atoms in the universe. It's crazy, yeah. And so later, obviously, comes Facebook ads. Then we have Twitter, which kind of came into being, essentially became popular at South by, and the hipsters don't call it South by Southwest because we can't be bothered with 4 letters. We'll just do the 2. So it launches, and then come Twitter ads. So the one pattern you will notice here is that every single time we have technology, new ways of getting to people, and then advertising helps us get to them. So it's interesting how this happens. Every single time we come up with a new technology, new way to interact, new way to entertain, advertising kind of shows up, essentially. And so if we think about the history of marketing, for the most part, it's really the history of advertising. Those two things have been coupled for a very long time, and were coupled. So then the question is, well, if the past was about advertising, then what's the future about? So that's what we're going to talk about. By the way, if you have questions along the way, raise your hand or walk up to a microphone. This is not meant to, and I will go on for the whole whatever time. I have time left at the end, but if you will not interrupt my train of thought, so don't worry about that. I'm not that cohesive. It'll be okay. We will recover. So if you have a question along the way, don't try and save it for the end. Just go ahead and ask if you prefer to ask it now. That's completely okay. And a confession before we talk about future things. I am not a futurist. I do not play a futurist on TV. I write code for a living and sometimes write content for a living. That's about it. And I will lead this one with this one prediction, which is some of these things are going to be wrong. So by definition, I'm going to be right about something. If nothing else, it'll be this thing. And I'm going to start with, so when making predictions, I'm a engineer and geek by trade, so I kind of lump things into categories. There are different kinds of predictions you can make. You can make predictions around trends that are already happening and predict that they're going to continue. And those are easy because they're just like, oh, it's already happening, and I think it's going to continue to happen. Which brings me to prediction 0. We start from 0 in the programming world, is that unsurprisingly mobile devices will continue to be popular. That's my prediction. I think I'm going to be right about that one. But surprisingly, pundits will continue to pontificate on mobile growth. For the longest time, like year after year, since like forever, like 2002, which is forever. It's like, oh, this is the year of mobile. This is the year of mobile. This is the year. Like every year, it's like this. No, really, seriously, this is the year of mobile. And I think they were rightish. And now those that are saying this is the year of mobile, they're actually very wrong, because last year was actually the year of mobile. It's here now. We're attached to our phones. As evidenced by, if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these are the basic fundamental needs that all humans, carbon-based life forms have. Physiological, like food and water. Safety, like shelter, all the way up into actualization and kind of knowing why we're on the planet. And I would update this and say the phone is now at the very, very bottom of the pyramid. I don't think many of us treat our phones as extensions of ourselves. They're like a limb. And it's like, okay, well, I actually walk funny when my phone is not in my pocket because it just throws my whole kind of weight center off. I'm so used, I get withdrawal symptoms if I'm away from it. It's sitting right there. I know where it is. It'll be okay. And so thinking about mobile, and so I'm going to walk through some what we'll call predictions, for lack of a better term, and then some guidance / advice / tips on things that I would do about those if I were you. So one is, it's not just about having a mobile strategy. It's like, okay, well, we're going to sit down and write this 40-page paper on what we're going to do about mobile, which is good, but that's not really enough. What you really need is a mobile mindset, and that's a different thing altogether, which is let's think about how our users, how our consumers, how our customers actually will use mobile, and let's get into that mindset, because one of the mistakes, and I'm from the B2B world, one of the mistakes B2B companies make all the time is they assume that mobile, oh, it's that thing that happens in B2C land. That's the thing with like restaurants and retail or whatever. But I sell high-end enterprise security software to IT folks. Mobile doesn't really impact my life because no one ever bought a $40,000 enterprise security appliance from their iPhone. And I think that's a misguided way of looking at it, because the reality is, as it turns out, businesses that buy from you, if you're in the B2B space, are humans too, and they are still struck with the same phenomenon. So like all of you are going to be visiting potential customer sites here. So I'm going to close this section. We're not going to spend a lot of time on mobile. We have other things to talk about. But so it'd be good if you kind of ask yourselves, this is like step one in the process, how do people use mobile in our particular market? What's better than that is, how do I make my website responsive? And by being responsive is like, how does it actually respond to the constraints and the properties of the device being used to access that website? So if you're coming on an iPhone versus an iPad versus a desktop browser, is your website responsive to that particular context? But what's even better than that is thinking through, it's not just about websites, it's how do I make my organization responsive to the context, to the things I should know and people expect me to know about them. And that's really where you kind of need to be, and I think that's the next step. And we're still, as an industry, kind of getting to here, which is the better part. How do we make our websites? And we're still kind of catching up, a lot of us, which is okay. But I think ultimately where you want to get to is figuring out how to make the organization itself more responsive to context. By the way, for those of you that think I'm like talking really fast, I have only one other speed. It's even faster than this. So if you want to slow me down, one effective way to do that is to ask a question or do something, sing a song, something. All right, so prediction one is I think the future will be influenced more by Mass Ave than it will be by Madison Ave. And this is eminently tweetable for those that are wondering. It's designed as such. And so I'm going to talk through this. So Madison Ave kind of came into being, became the center of kind of the old school marketing world roughly around 1960 is where it kind of, and it was an interesting place because it was very, very kind of, it was creative driven, right? So there were lots of creativity in terms of advertising, and we learned about copywriting and all sorts of good stuff. And one of the best things that Madison Avenue, in my mind, ever did for us was it made Mad Men possible. Because without Madison Avenue, we wouldn't have... Any Mad Men fans out there? I'm just curious. Okay, all right, cool. So my thesis is, though, and it's not about Madison Avenue, the place. I have nothing against the location. It's the mindset, right? This is going towards, that creativity was applied, necessarily so, but very narrowly in the early days. And when I talk about Mass Ave, I'm not really thinking about like the location. I'm thinking about the mindset. And so I'm going to describe to you why I think Mass Ave is going to have more influence over marketing than Madison Avenue is going to have. And I'm not going to say it's because HubSpot was born at MIT, and so therefore I'm not going to make that argument at all. The argument I'm going to make is that we've seen over decades this proliferation in the amount of kind of media and channels and information and just general stuff available to people. And this brings us to this relatively astute observation, is that the more of that information you have, the harder it is to get attention because people's choices have grown exponentially. Their choices have grown exponentially. And the, I'll say, sad part is that as new channels kept being added, advertisers essentially kept asking themselves, okay, so we've got this new media out there, this new channel, we need to come up with more effective, creative ways to interrupt that channel. That's effectively what advertising has historically been. And we've been better at it, don't get me wrong, I'm kind of part of the marketing industry, but I think, and this is not a relatively new thing, it's Seth Godin kind of observed this 15 years ago with the challenge with advertising. And fundamentally the issue is that as humans, we just don't like being interrupted. We don't. And so the question is, well, Dharmesh, if that's the case, if we don't like being interrupted, how has the industry gone on so long and then channel after channel has been successful? Like we've succeeded all the way through, from print to radio to TV to the internet, social. All of them have more or less worked. And the argument I'm going to give you is that through most of that time period, people at an aggregate level valued time less than money. They valued time less than money because they said, oh, in order for me to get this exceptional content, the only real way I have to get it is to actually suffer through the advertising, right? That's the way. That's the way you got to great content. That's the way you subsidized the awesome shows and the awesome news and all those things that you wanted. And so that was the case. The thing I'm going to posit to you, and it's already happening and will continue to happen, is that over time, people are going to value time more than money, right? So they're not going to as readily suffer through advertising in the future as they have in the past. So not only are we getting more channels and more just raw competition for their attention, they're willing to give up less of it if they have the option not to, right? And one of the current manifestations, as you might tell, I'm a TV and kind of movie kind of guy, is House of Cards. House of Cards fans in the house, raise your hands. All right, a lot of you. Okay, cool. One thing that was fascinating about House of Cards is the show was great. There have been lots of great shows. Is the fact that Netflix is the one that made the show. And Netflix is interesting because they started out essentially shipping media around on trucks by mail in DVD form, which I call taking bits, putting them on atoms, and then shipping them over so people can convert them back to bits and things like that, which is inefficient, which they learned, so they're doing streaming now. But what they said is, oh, well, you know what? Maybe this kind of production of content people enjoy is not that hard, and we should give it a shot, right? So what they essentially said is, instead of being a classic media company, which is we are really good at producing content, that means we're really good at getting attention, that means we're going to get really good at renting that attention that we've been getting to other people, Netflix said, why not just give the people what they want and see if they'll pay for it, right? And this is a very profound shift, because before we had this three-person relationship, three entities. You had the consumer that wanted to consume content, you had the producer of that content, and then you had the advertiser. And the weird thing is, the advertiser was at odds. And so what the producer's trying to do is like, okay, I want to get the attention, but then it's like, okay, I'm going to show you this cool stuff, but just for a little while, watch this thing so I can continue to make good stuff. But then watch this thing for a little while so I can continue to make good stuff. There's this tension that existed, and what Netflix is doing essentially is removing that tension, is to say, let's just create great content and let's give it to people because they're willing to pay. I think this is working, and I think we'll continue to see this and things like it. So my argument around why Mass Ave is going to be, I think, the kind of driver of innovation is that, in my mind, in the long term, and I'm an optimist, is innovation should be about kind of creating value in creating time, not giving people new ways to consume it or destroy it, right? So marketing should be, in the future, about creating value, right? And that's where I think that's happening now. It's not, I don't think, happening in the kind of old Madison Avenue mindset. I think it's shifting. So my tip, By the way, most of this presentation is like dark gray to black or something like that. No, it's not. I'm kidding. Some of it's lighter. But my tip here, like my advice would be, if you are on the buy side of the equation, if you are renting attention from someone else, whoever that might be, one thing you should be aware of is that because it's getting harder and harder for those landlords, people that actually own the attention that you're renting, as they get squeezed, which they are, they have one of two choices. They have to raise rents, to say, you know what, it's costing us much more to actually get to 1,000 people to do X, whatever it happens to be, because it's just so much hard to get attention now. Or they're going to shift business models, and you're not going to be able to rent that attention anymore, which I think of as kind of evictions. And so my advice here would be, instead of continually renting attention from someone else and thinking of kind of marketing as this expense that I have, it's like, oh, I just kind of pay the rent in the hopes that rents don't go up, in the hopes that the landlord doesn't evict me. Why not think of it as an investment? Why not buy? Why not buy and create something of value that cannot be taken away? So you say something useful, you produce something useful that your customers actually want to consume. And we're seeing this, I think there was some discussion about this earlier during the conference, is that over time, I think more and more companies and more marketing teams are going to become media producers. They're going to become publishers. They're going to create value instead of having to have someone else create value on their behalf and then having to rent that attention. That was number one. Number two prediction is that the future will not be a battle of man versus machine in terms of humans versus software. My thesis is that it will be about man and machine versus malevolence, versus evil. And I'm going to describe this by virtue of talking about brands. And historically, the way we've thought about brands, and I think correctly thought about brands, is that brand is in the mind of the beholder. So brand, as I've heard, I don't know who said this, but it's, brand is what people say about you after you've left the room. Like, what do they actually think about you? And that's true. I would adjust it now to say brand is no longer just about what humans think. It's also now being shaped by machines and by software and by data. We're going to describe this through an example. So I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how email works and email deliverability works. So most of you are doing some form of email marketing. You're sending messages out either for marketing or for to customers. And the way it works is that you hope that as much of your email as possible winds up in the inbox of the people that you send it to. Like deep down, you don't worry about this like every Monday morning, but you think about it. It's like, oh, what are my open rates? What are my click-through rates? And you watch those numbers. And the way it actually works is that when you send out a 100,000 person email campaign, let's say, let's assume about 10,000 of those goes to Gmail, just for discussion. And all the major email providers, including Google, including AOL, all of them have software that tries to figure out whether this particular email that they're about to put in someone's inbox is good or not. And one of the ways they determine that is past performance. To what degree did people mark your messages as spam or unwanted in the past? And so they have software that's figuring out how much they trust you. And how much they trust you impacts the deliverability of every future email you will ever send. So now if you're thinking about, like, what does my brand look like in the minds of people, that's important. It's like, oh, well, do they like me? Will they visit my website? Will they buy from me? But now there are a bunch of machines, and that's just email. Happening in search, happening in social, happening everywhere. So now your brand is fragmented, and how these machines are programmed, and all the software that's been created, it's there for one single purpose. It's there to predict the probability that a message will be well received. So when Google ranks your particular website, number one, the reason Google is doing that is like, oh, well, this particular page happens to be about whatever the user is searching for, and we trust this website. We trust the company behind it, and so we're going to go ahead and send them along and give them traffic through the Google search engine. Same thing with email. Which brings me to one of my more controversial predictions is around telemarketing. Now, telemarketing, on average, a U.S. Citizen actually gets 2 to 3 calls, telemarketing calls defined as being marketing or commercially driven, about 2 to 3 times a day, which means, like some of you must not be getting any because I'm getting way more than 2 to 3 a day. And the kind of stereotypical response, I don't need to beat this into your head, is something like this or something like this. which is why we have things like caller ID, which is why we have the do not call list. And a quick update on the do not call list. The legislation was just updated this week, October 16th, where they're going into like what qualifies, and now, and you should read through. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. The update was like, well, we're going to automatically assume that everyone is on the do not call list. So you have now, as a marketer using automated calling, automated dialing, you have to get written consent from an individual. Just providing your phone number is not consent anymore. Used to be. It is no longer consent for telemarketers to call you, right? So big shift. So my prediction here is that over time, the same thing we saw happening in email, which is, oh, these kind of email systems got a lot smarter. They want to solve for their users' interest. And so essentially they started filtering and said, oh, well, you're not even going to see 99% of the spam that people try to send you. And they're getting better and better and better about it, right? Because it's in the person's interest, the user's interest. So the prediction is that ultimately the smartphone is going to kill all the stupid calls. All of them. And here's why. Is that, and so I actually had this thought earlier this year, and I thought, oh my God, I'm brilliant. This is the best thing I've ever thought of in the last 2 years, which is, oh, you know what we need? What we need is an application on our phone that says, oh, I just got a call from someone, and after I get aggravated with them, whatever, there should be, after I end the call, there should be a button that lets me downvote whoever it was that was calling. It's like, I don't like them. That was a undesired call. That did not make my day. And then it's like, oh, and then what should happen is that then we should collect all this information from all the people using phones, and it should go into some central system. And then it's like, before the call even gets to me, it's like someone tries to call me that 1,000 other people have said downvote, downvote, downvote. My phone shouldn't even ring, right? Forget voicemail. It shouldn't even ring, just like spam gets blocked before it ever makes it to your inbox. And as it turns out, my idea was not original, not by a long shot. So there are already applications out there. Probably one of the better known ones is this app called Privacy Star. And one of the things it does is on your Android, they can't support it yet. The app is there on iPhone, but the feature I'm about to talk about, they can't support yet. But it's exactly what I just spoke of, right? It's like, oh, phone comes in, downvote, and then they track how many downvotes individual organizations or phone numbers essentially have had. And you can say, well, if someone has had a lot of downvotes or essentially complaints, just block them. Block the text, block the phone, just block them. And what's even cooler is that they actually have right within the app a way to file a complaint with the FTC. And they track that too. It's like, okay, I'm going to say I want to report this particular person because they should not have my number. I did not provide consent. This is a big deal. So that's where I think telemarketing is headed. By the way, HubSpot does telemarketing too, so I'm not, it's part of our relatively small fraction of our marketing, but we do have it. So for those HubSpot folks that are out there listening or watching the video, find new ways. All right, so prediction 3. And this is an upbeat one. You guys already know it's not in my nature to pander. Is great marketers are going to have better careers in the future than they have had in the past. And they're on average going to make more money. It's going to be a relatively good profession to be in. So some of the data is already starting to come in. So the average tenure of a CMO in 2006 was 23 months. And some of you may have seen this data. Is now up to 45 months. So CMOs are lasting longer, if nothing else. And the presumption would be it's because now we are starting to recognize that it may take more than 23 months to actually figure out and fix the marketing department of whatever company just hired this person, which I think is true. It does take more than 23 months. But I think the kind of larger view on this is that as an industry now we actually have respect because we have shifted from this we're guessing arts and craftsy kind of discipline to a very data-driven, scientific, we think about returns, we think about creating revenue, we think about the numbers, and we like to demonstrate value as an industry. And no disparagement to the folks from 40, 50 years ago, they didn't have the technology or the tools to actually be able to do this, right? Like you didn't have much choice. Now we do. We have the data, we know the returns, we know what channels are working and which ones are not online. So the thing that I think that's going to drive marketing now as a profession is we're going to hopefully stop, someday stop, but at least ask about, is marketing creating value? Is it just an expense? What is it? And it will not be the first line item on the P&L that people look to cut when things are down. Hopefully they're thinking of it as an investment. And what we will start thinking about is velocity, not value. So we will assume marketing is creating value. The question will now be, are you moving fast enough to where the organization needs to go? That's the question that will be asked of CMOs and marketing departments all over, I think from now on forward. All right, so some of you are wondering, well, Dharmesh, I thought I heard you mention in the first slide of this prediction that we're all going to get a raise if we work in marketing. Talk more about that, which I shall. Did I just say that marketers are going to get a raise? Yes, all great inbound marketers. I can't go through an entire presentation without using the word inbound at least once, right? I wouldn't be doing my job. But I'm going to tell you why I think this. And the way I'm going to describe this is through my engineering background. I run a tech company, and so I know something about engineering. I've got an engineering background. And I'm going to state the obvious here, but engineers are not typists. Although they spend a lot of time typing, their profession is not typing. They're not typists. And this is evidenced in the data because we do not pay engineers like typists. And the reason we do not pay engineers like typists is because great engineers, they create things, they exercise judgment, and they work to get leverage. Can I write this small piece of code? Can I add this one feature that 10,000 people will like, as a result of which I create value, my company makes more money, I get a raise? They're looking for leverage. And engineering, software development, has always been a very high leverage business. You can do a very little amount of work, and if it's really good, if it gets traction, there's a lot of value that's created. It's awesome for leverage. I'm going to argue that marketers are not typists either. Great marketers create things, exercise judgment, and work to get leverage. So if you have a marketer that is consistently producing awesome blog content, and you can measure the numbers that's driving hits to the website, driving leads, driving customers, driving revenue, they're worth a fair amount. The math is there, right? It's like they're looking for leverage in the same way engineers look for leverage. Finite amount of time. If it's awesome, what you're producing, lots and lots of potential value, right? It's very, very different from, I have this $50,000 ad budget, and I'm going to figure out how to spend it by picking the right agency and getting the 10% mark, all that stuff, which is good. It's value created, but it's not high leverage value. The odds of you actually doing exceptionally well and getting a home run are relatively low. All right. So then the question is, well, why don't marketers get paid more? Dharmesh, that sounds brilliant. We all deserve raises. We should go back. We should all get raises. And the answer is why it's, I think this whole concept of thinking of marketing as being both measurable and having this massive amount of leverage is a relatively new thing. But once again, this is the kind of optimist and maniacal kind of economist in me, is like, markets catch up. The reason we pay engineers so much now versus even 5-10 years ago is that we figured out over the last 5 to 7 years, oh, by the way, this is not something that can be outsourced. This is not something about cheap labor in India or Malaysia or somewhere else. This is a creative discipline, which is why like the unemployment rate like engineering land is like practically zero. It's like negative. There's so much demand. Marketing is going to head in a similar direction in my mind, if all goes well. All right, number 4. This is a little bit techie, so apologies in advance. Browser cookies, which is the thing we use to track website visitors, anonymous website visitors, both on a site and off a site, across and share all this data. All this stuff is happening. Lots of legislation happening outside of the United States. Ultimately, those little cookies that we have in our browsers, ultimately they're going to go away. They're going to go away. It's just a matter of time. So I will be right about that. But the reality is it's not going to matter much because those are not the only ways that people can, that organizations can track an anonymous web visitor. So gets probably, it's one of the most useful tools out there, scary, but they get like a C on marketing because that's like the weirdest name ever, Panopticlick. But it's put out there by the EFF, and also I'll put these slides up on there, I'll put a link. But what it does essentially is you visit this website, you click a button, and it tests you, and it tells you how unique is your browser without looking at cookies, based on everything that your browser is reporting without cookies, how unique is it amongst all the other websites they've looked at. And the reality is there's enough information being passed in most cases, 81+% of the cases, they can trace it down to you without a cookie at all, just by looking at screen size and what software you have installed and what features your browser supports, which browser you're using on what device, based on just those pieces of information, which are not blocked by any cookie laws, they can figure this out anyway. So the reality, though, is that cookies are not optimal regardless, whether they do or don't work, whether they get taken away or not, because in a multi-device world, cookies have less and less value. So if someone was on their browser and then stayed on their browser and came back tomorrow and came back 4 days later and like all their entire relationship with you was on that one device, cookies sort of worked, right? They were somewhat useful. But that's not the way most humans are behaving anymore. We're moving from device to device, and the cookies do not cross over. So the answer to that particular problem, in my mind, is if you really want to build context around the users that are coming to your website, you need to build a connection. And the way this works is look to the successful e-commerce companies. Look at Amazon. Amazon does not have to care about cookies. They do not have to care about cookies. They do not have to care about multiple devices because chances are you're logged into Amazon. So if you go to your web browser like right now when you get home or something like that, if you've ever bought anything from Amazon, you're going to stay logged on. So everything you do on Amazon, they know, which is good. And you want them to know because you have this relationship, you have this connection, and they make your life easier by having your account kind of connected up. So my advice here would be we need to be thinking more like that, which is can we actually think of these anonymous web visitors and turn them into users and content consumers? Can we think of a membership site or something like that, something where they log in and stay logged in, so that way you have this constant connection instead of this ephemeral web cookie-driven thing where you have no idea who that person really is as they move across devices. Make sense? All right. I was actually proud of myself. I paused, took a breath, made like eye contact with a random like exit sign. Awesome. All right, so number 5, and there's, I think, 6 or 7 in here. We'll see. We'll talk about big data. My prediction is big data is going to be really, really big. And as long as the big actually means impact. One thing that bothers me by the term big data is like, well, what the heck is that? Like, what makes data big? This is Wikipedia's definition, which is it's a collection of data sets so large and complex that it becomes difficult to process using traditional data processing applications, which I paraphrase as meaning if it's bigger than what you can handle, it's big to you, essentially. So that's big data. What I want to talk about is how this is kind of coming together, its impact on marketing. The reason data is becoming big is that it's not sitting in individual silos anymore. So my thought here is that marketing is going to look less like just a discrete division within an organization. It's going to become increasingly a part of the fabric of the organization. So things are going to start to blend because the data sets are going to start to blend. And the question of like, oh, well, marketing owned this particular person all the way up until like they were reading content, they did this, they became a lead, and then we qualified them. And so now they go to sales, and then sales does some magic or whatever, and then they get sold, and now they're a customer, and now customer service takes care of them. I think we're going to start, and this is already happening, and this, from an earlier discussion at FutureM as well, is that kind of CIO versus CMO partnership, which should exist but doesn't. I think over time, big data or just this kind of aggregation of data, pulling data together, might drive some of that. I don't know what it actually looks like, but my thesis is that we're going to see more integration versus kind of division because it just makes sense for the users. So where's all this data going to come from? This is a little bit geeked out. So obviously, humans are going to produce some of this data as we're doing already. We're going to have more and more devices. So I have a Fitbit in my pocket, which is like tracks my lack of activity, essentially. That reminds me, Dharmesh, you're just not moving hardly at all. But it's good to know. And we're going to see more of those sensors, right? So there's this whole kind of industry, nascent industry, and MIT is a huge part of it, called the quantified self, that says everything about our physical lives, to our benefit, will start being tracked, right? Caloric intake and walking and movement and things like that. We're seeing more data around sensors within companies. It's like, oh, we can, when you wear your employee badge around, it can detect which room you're in, who you met with, what the stress level of your voice was in a meeting, all those things. We're going to have all this data coming in. And then over time, I think consumers will have increasing control over how much of that data they share with which organizations, and the ones they share it with are the ones that they believe are going to provide value in return. But we're going to see this influx, and we've been kind of exposed to this in a very small way as an industry now through just the fact that smartphones have GPS devices on them now. Right? I have like a little essentially a transmitter that says, here's where I am. And that has been life-changing for lots of people in the marketing space. Like, oh, I know, like someone is right here close to me, so I want to promote this because they're walking by my store, I can pull them into my restaurant, whatever it is. That was just the beginning. We're going to see so much more and lots of data coming in. And I'll close on the data. This is a quote from Marissa, who's I think one of the smartest people in tech, originally from Google, now the CEO of Yahoo. And the quote is, "In the future, you become the query." And I will elaborate here. It's so in the past, when you do a search query, you sit at Google or Yahoo in this case, and you type, it's like, "I am looking for a real estate broker," or "I want pizza places in Brookline," let's say. And Marissa's thesis is that a lot of what we need to know, the search engines need to know, can automatically be known simply by who you are. So you are the query. It's like, "I am Dharmesh." You already know where I live. You already know it's 2 a.m. in the morning. You already know I've been coding because you've been like, "Send me pizza," kind of thing, right? It's like, so in the same way auto-suggest works, right, which is you type a few characters, it's like, "Oh, this is what I think you're searching for." And isn't it uncannily good how well it does? Like, wow, how do they know? So Marissa's thesis is that over time, as more and more data becomes available, that context becomes much and much richer, and a larger and larger body of potential search queries can essentially be inferred by the context of the user. So you are the query, not what you type in, essentially, or at least a big part of the query. Right. So we'll wind down here so we can take some questions. Number 6. In the future, I think technology will matter, and I'm a tech guy, so I can't not say that, but I think talent will matter more. Even in marketing, even with all the discussions of big data. And I'm hoping, as a part of that, the marketing industry will fix its perception problem. I'm not sure if you were aware of this, but we have a perception problem. And the perception problem is the reaction from lots of people that didn't grow up in marketing, let's say you're a millennial. When you say marketing, they're like, "Oh, I work in marketing," they have this ew reaction. Like, I'm paraphrasing and summarizing, but it essentially comes down to ew. They're thinking it. They may not say it out loud, or they may, depending. And so Gallup's been tracking this for a long time, years actually. And the good news is in the last year, our net positive rating, the net positive rating is so of all the people surveyed, they said, "How many of you think marketing is a positive thing? And then how many of you think marketing is a negative thing?" And they subtract those two numbers. Right? How many people think it's positive? How many people think it's negative? And so our net score moved up by 10 points, which is the good news. The bad news is we went from a -4 to a 6. People just don't like us a whole lot. But I'm an optimist. I think we are going to overcome this, and I will explain why. So partly, we're going to see this inflection of an entirely new species of human entering the workforce. So millennials are coming in based on whatever data study you look at. There's a lot of them. There's going to be an increasing lot of them, and they buy stuff, right? So that's the kind of buyer side of the equation. So look, you need to understand how millennials buy, and that's a great reason to update your marketing because those are your customers. Those are the people. They're going to be the VPs of technology and CIOs and things like that over the course of the next 5-10 years, right? So, and they did not grow up in the Mad Men era. They did not grow up with the old school. They have no comprehension of why it has to be so evil, and they will not tolerate it. There's no reason for them to, and so they won't. But that's only half the equation. That's partly why I think marketing is going to fix this perception problem because we will have no choice. But the other part of it is that millennials actually have this relatively, I won't call it altruistic, but a different perspective on life just because of the time they grew up. And not only are they going to be buyers, as it turns out over time, they're going to be marketers as well, right? And that seems like a relatively obvious thing. It's like, okay, well, we're not going to get a disproportionately lower number of millennials coming into the kind of marketing workforce, and that's going to change things. And so my thought here is that if you want to win in marketing over the next 5, 10, 20 years, you're going to have to, you're going to have to create content, but the only real way to do that is you're going to have to be able to attract talent that can produce that content. Okay, so, and as it turns out, as we've talked about before, even like marketers that are working in the profession, if you're relatively new, and even if you're not relatively new, deep down inside, you're a little bit embarrassed about some of the old school tactics, I think rightfully so. And so the kind of stages that people go through when they get into marketing is first it's like, wait, you want me to do what now? Like buy this list from somewhere and what? And then they go to, and ask them like, what do you do? It's like, oh, they made me do it. I didn't really want to do it, but that was my job and I didn't know any better, reaction. And then they ultimately figure it out. And like, that was totally not awesome. That was just not awesome. So what ends up happening is, by virtue of natural selection, organizations, marketing organizations that are not becoming increasingly awesome will not be able to attract the talent and will continue over time to be ineffective and fail. We will just wash out the mediocrity and the malevolence over time, and that will improve marketing for all of us. I think this will be great. So the things, this kind of new generation, it's not just new, just like the new thinking kind of drives, and we've gotten really good at this, which I love. I love that because it's important to measure what matters, and we've talked about how we're ROI driven now, which is awesome. The thing we're learning now, a little bit more slowly, actually, is doing what matters is even more important, even though it can't actually be measured. And you will see that this is where kind of creativity and insight and intuition actually comes in. So you need to do both. In order to attract the kind of marketing stars of tomorrow, you have to demonstrate a willingness to actually do things that others haven't done, right? They don't want to work. Like, no one wakes up, as someone earlier in this conference, like, wakes up wanting to be average. That's not the goal. And so the idea here is, and it's not that you have to be globally unique. It's like, oh, I'm going to do something that no one on the planet has ever done before. It doesn't have to be that extreme, but you can do things that no one in your industry has ever done before, and that's okay. That's creative. So I'm going to wind down here. So in my mind, you have to create marketing people love. That's what the future is going to look like, because as humans, we won't tolerate, and you guys have heard me say this up on stages, on videos, in blog articles, time and time again. At least I'm consistent. I've been saying it for 7 years. And so marketing is going to be about being human, essentially. That's my content. Thanks for your time. And I'll take questions, by the way. This is fun. So we have a little bit of time for questions. We have mic, or we can, yeah, probably for the video, it's probably better to use the mic. Or speak really loudly if you raise your hand. And
I lost my voice here, so you don't mind. If you, given your background in HubSpot on B2B marketing, I'm very curious to hear your view that how social changing advertising world in general. Clearly, Facebook is a game changer, I think, in B2C marketing. And what about B2B marketing? How do you think socials do it? Is Facebook the answer, or are there any other forms of social media, maybe LinkedIn, that provide the game-changing aspect of the business, marketing business, as Facebook did to the B2C side?
Sure, thank you. So a couple of quick things. I'm a social media fanatic, right? And you can't be like borderline crazy and have 200,000+ followers on Twitter. It's not possible. So I spend a lot of time on social media. My belief is that, and so none of the companies I've talked about, I'm trying to go through, other than HubSpot, I've invested in 50 startups. I haven't talked about any of them. But I am long on Facebook, just from a disclosure perspective. I bought Facebook stock on opening day. I have not sold it because I think I'm going to make a lot of money. So I don't think Facebook is necessarily the answer. What makes Facebook extremely interesting and powerful is the fact that they have access to this entire new data set that no one has ever really had before, right? So Google had all this information about websites and who's linking to who, and they crawl the entire web and all these web pages, and they use that to kind of deliver answers to questions, responses to queries that you were doing. Facebook actually has a very, very different data set, and in my mind, a better data set for certain use cases. For instance, what they know is who your friends are, who you're interacting with, who you're upvoting, how long you've known them, all of this kind of social data, the social graph. And for a certain class of queries, I think that's going to be a winning data set. For instance, let's say you were looking for, I want to find a landscaper in Brookline, which is my hometown, just a couple of miles from here. I could go to Google, right? And I could say landscaper in Brookline. Well, Google will show me, in theory, based on this kind of search engine data I have, and this is changing as well, but they'll show me all the websites that are like well optimized, they've got great content, they've been blogging about landscaping, which is awesome, useful, right? That's a good thing. What Facebook will show me is like, here are landscapers that your friends have used and what they thought about those landscapers. Or there happens to be a second cousin that happens to be in the landscaping business or whatever, and maybe you will avoid them if they're a second. I don't know, but in theory, they have more information that I think will be used. So I think the very first step in kind of Facebook as search engine essentially will be people-based queries. Like, so historically, we've always seen Facebook used as a search engine for, I want to find my ex-boyfriend from the 80s, 90s, whatever it was. Now it's going to be, if I'm looking for people, since they have all the social data, it'll be good. I think on the B2B side, as it turns out, even within B2B, the people actually doing the buying are human, as it turns out. We're not in a world yet where you simply have agents out there doing all this kind of due diligence and RFP review or whatever, and just buying stuff. They're still human, and those humans have a history. Those humans pass judgment. Those humans like to know things. So if let's say I'm a sales rep at HubSpot, trying to sell HubSpot, and if it's on the buyer on the other end wants to know like what makes this person tick. Have any of my friends ever talked to this guy? Is he a schmuck or is he good? That kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be really good. So I think it's going to change the nature of how we think about both advertising and data. So I think social, will make that gap once again. Despite all the things that I've said, I think that'll work for a while because it's new and they have the attention already. They're not having to build it. It's all user-generated content. They didn't have to produce it for the most part, so I think it'll work. All right, question here. Thank you.
So you mentioned that brands should focus more on being content publishers. Is there such thing as creating too much content, too much good content? Because I've noticed, for instance, that HubSpot has a bunch of great content, a bunch of great blog posts, and there's so many of them, and they're so great, but then sometimes people don't have enough time to read them. So where do you find balance between
Yep.
really good content and how much of it you put out?
All right, so the question is around, can there be too much? I'm advocating that brands and organizations generally become more kind of content producers. Is there such a thing as too much content where you're just overflowing people and I think there will be a time where there's too much content. I'm not sure we're quite, in terms of good content, I don't think there will be, we're not there yet. But here, I'll give you an inside story on HubSpot. So HubSpot produces a lot of content, which many of you have both enjoyed and suffered through based on your point of view. And probably like a few years ago, sit down with the marketing team, which was much smaller then. I'm like, folks, like, we're producing a lot of content. And my statement to them was, I can't read all of this stuff. I'm the founder of the company, right? And so I asked the same question that you're asking, which is, are we producing too much content, essentially? And although I would have liked to have been right, I ended up being wrong. And what I was wrong about, let's just take down the volume of content because people will be happier, we'll get just as many leads and customers. And the reality is that it's like different content for different people, number one, so it comes down to... So we tested it. We said, like, okay, well, we're going to do this. We're going to take the 20, 30 articles we would have published. We're going to just take the best 5 or 10 that we think are really, really good and just publish those and see what happens over some period of time. And what we learned was that at least up until and it may kind of taper off asymptotically at some point, is that more content tends to work. It just tends to work. So the thing we're doing now, just launched this week, so we took our blog, which has been really popular. It's one of the primary source for business for us. And we're like, okay, well, we are producing a lot of content, and we may be, so kind of revisiting the conversation, we're turning that blog, instead of it being a blog, into a media site. Like, okay, well, how do the media companies handle this? Like, they're producing lots and lots of content. And so now if you look at blog.hubspot.com, it looks like a media site. It looks like a Huffington Post or whatever, where you have like categories and areas, and it's like very visual, so it's different. We're playing with personalization. We're always looking at measurement. But right now, in most categories, I would say we have not begun to approach the point of there's enough good content out there. There's just not. So if you do a random query on just about anything, maybe the first 3, 4, 5 results will be pretty good, let's say, in the search results. But it starts to look like crap very quickly. So I would love for there to be a day. It's like, you know what? Boy, my work here is done. I know it took me 12 years to get there, but all the great content that needed to be created, all of you listened, and we're there now. I don't think we're there yet. So thanks for your time. This was awesome.